Okay. Good day, panelists. Again, David Dunning and David Booth, and we've got Victoria here as well. We're going to give it a minute or two for our chat room, our Zoom room to fill up with our. And like always, attendees, feel free to tell us who you are and where you're from in the chat. We're starting to get to know our network by name at this stage, but it's always lovely to see who's joining us and who's interested in specific topics and webinars and series that we're doing. I have about 10 attendees more or less. We'll give it another minute. There I see you, Victoria, great. So we have Damien from Prague and Java here from Azerbaijan and Liesel Brown from South Africa, Tony from Zimbabwe. I hope it's warm on yours. Africa, really cold here at the moment. Dan from Canada, David from, where are you now? Maidenhead, Australia. Hi, Bongani. I've been chatting with you on WhatsApp just now. Okay, we're 2 minutes in, so I think let's maybe not waste any time. The way we're going to need as much time as possible. Panelists, I love the discussion that we already started even before this webinar. So let me officially open the webinar. Hi, everyone. You know me by now. I'm Lindy Greber from the Research Forum at the Good Governance Academy. And welcome to our second live webinar in our series on purpose-driven organizations. And today's webinar is entitled Drivers of Purpose in Business. We are absolutely fortunate to be joined by an esteemed panel of experts on the topic of purpose-driven organizations and business integrated governance, as well as strategy implementation. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Victoria Hirth. She's the technical author of the British Standard on Purpose-Driven Organizations, PAS 808, and describes herself as a pracademic, which I find so inspiring. Dr. Hirth has further been involved in various standards, guidelines, and practice developments, too many to mention here. Please read more about her and her endeavors in our chat, where we will post the links. We will please also do more reading on PAS 808 on purpose-driven organizations, and we'll also post the link in our chat there. Then we have our old friend, David Dunning. He's the lead author on business integrated governance through the big CIC, Deep Team, and CPS collaborations. You'll find more on the big knowledge outline and David himself through the links that we'll also post in the. And for more background reading, you'll see our link to the big knowledge outline, as I mentioned. Then we're also joined by David Booth as a guest panelist today. David, it's wonderful to have you here as well. David is the lead author on strategy journeys and a key contributor towards integrated governance. He is an expert on strategy delivery, as I understand. And we'd also like to refer you to strategy delivery, Where Does It All Go Wrong? A publication, and we'll post the link for you there, and more background reading, as well as more on David Booth himself. Okay. As I'm sure you can gather from today's webinar title, we're moving from a corporate level perspective of purpose-driven organizations that we discussed in our first webinar towards a business level practical approach and perspective in this webinar. In the previous webinar, we discussed the notion of purpose-driven organizations. We have a lovely slide here on the worldview of purpose-driven organizations and what we mean in terms of the principle and the standard that's being developed, and how do we align this in a real world organization. We discussed the notion, we discussed the as-is of organizations at the moment in terms of their organizational purposes, as well as the challenges faced in the way forward. So our participants gave feedback in our discussions and told us what are those challenges and what they'd like to learn more about in implementing purpose-driven organizations. Okay, so We will post a link to our previous webinar, the recording or it is posted, it's on the website under events on the GGA website. And then also a link to the write-up that David did for us in the chat also to follow. So keep an eye on the chat today with lots of links added information on that. Okay, so building on our first webinar and your feedback, today, in simple terms, from Principle 2 of PASO 808, we will look at achieving purpose in the right way. And as I mentioned, it takes more of a business level perspective or approach. And in addition to our discussions, specifically, David will also provide Dunning and Booth will give a more practical guidance on integrating your purpose in your organization. Okay, so a brief overview of what we will cover today. We will start off with Victoria providing an outline of Principle 2 of purpose-driven organizations. Then we'll hand over to David Dunning on the implications for purpose-driven organizations, and once again, integrating that and implementing it in your organization. We will again have a poll and a discussion with all of our panelists today. So please, during these, you will be invited to voluntarily participate. Please post your thoughts during our panel discussions on the platforms provided or also on the Q&A or chat. We love to hear your feedback, and David will say a bit more about that later on, and Victoria as well. Okay, and then after our discussions, we'll touch on key components of business integrated governance from or within the domain of purpose-driven organizations, and we'll conclude with also a call to action. Okay, so really briefly, that is all from me. I will now hand over to Victoria to give us an overview of Principle 2 of purpose-driven organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right, hopefully you can see my slides okay there?
Yes,
brilliant.
Thanks.
Okay, so I've got about 8 minutes for this. So this is going to be just a top level overview so that we can spend lots of time unpicking and discussing, led by David. So yeah, really super to be with you all, and I hope you get a lot out of this session. So just first of all, to contextualize what we're talking about here, not to redo the first session, and there's a lot of material out there, including at the beginning of PAS 808. But this is what, when we talk about purpose-driven organizations, this is what we're talking about. So we're not talking about the middle of the triangle, logic 1, which means the objective is financial self-interest, and the main things that you see as your parameter or means to that end is stocks and flows of financial capital. Logic 2, where you are starting to be enlightened self-interest and realize that you're going to have to divert capital within the business case to support the health of everything at the bottom of the triangle there, the non-financial capitals, the social and environmental systems, and the health of the stakeholders, if you are going to make as much money as you can in anything but the short term. So that's the sort of move to ESG, that's that sort of logic 2. And there's a difference between just about getting some aspects of that, say having a net zero policy or a minimum wage policy, or bringing your values into parameters, to really understanding the full breadth of the breakdown of the health at the bottom of the triangle. But purpose is different, because whilst, of course, you need enough financial capital, non-financial capital, you need healthy social and environmental systems and stakeholders, the objective in logic 1 and 2 is still self-interest, and usually financial self-interest. Whereas purpose-driven organization, the objective changes. So essentially what you're doing is bypassing all of the assumptions about how the market economy works in order to automatically pop out well-being, and that we can think of finance as an automatic proxy for the well-being outcomes, because the economy is there to achieve well-being. We just assume the market does its thing so well, we don't even govern if that's the case. But unsustainability tells us it's not the case, and purpose-driven organizations are a response to that in order to embed a specific contribution to sustainability, in other words, long-term well-being for all, into the reason that that organization exists. And what that does in governance terms is change the business case, the strategy, because you have a different goal as well as different parameters. And that's what really matters. It's not just a nice concept. It fundamentally alters the governance that you have. And if anyone knows ISO 37000, you'll get the basics of what that means in terms of good governance in there. So this slide, there's a lot of, I'm not going to go into detail, but just to say that this is the structure of PAS 828, the British Standard on Purpose-Driven Organisations. It starts with worldviews. Lots of standards start with behaviours, which has led to tick boxing. And then, of course, we moved to principle-based standards because we weren't getting spillover effects. People were gaming the system. But what lies behind principles? It's all very well to say, adhere to a principle and make decisions that way. But it's your worldviews about what you fundamentally think is valuable to protect and enhance, and how you fundamentally think the world works. That's what will underpin your ability as an organization and a collective to implement a principle and therefore behaviors. So, and because purpose is a paradigm shift in understanding how we look at the market economy, it starts by very specifically saying, hey, if you, especially senior decision makers, but in total, if you don't have a good number of people that feel this way about the world, you need to start there, because otherwise the rest is going to be too hard. Anyway, we're now in this session going to be focusing on within the principles and behaviors domain. And in PAS 828, the principles are essentially based around ends and like objective and parameters, ends and means. So you've got the ends and then the means and then the methods. And means and methods are both basically parameters for decision making. The ends are what you're optimizing for. And what we're talking about here is principle 2. And so the well-being, the ends principles, there are 2 of them. And we're going to be focusing in on number 2. Number 1 just fundamentally says that the basis of governance is long-term well-being for all. So that is the ultimate meta value creation objective that we're all here to do. And it's the definition of sustainability and the goal of an economy. And that the governing body are committed to ensuring that the reason the organization exists is a contribution to that, and ensuring that that's constantly checked, et cetera, et cetera. Principle 2, it says, and you need to make sure that purpose, that optimal strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all, for the benefit of everyone forever and their well-being, is embedded within the operations, the strategy, the accountability, the oversight. So essentially your whole governance system. And it's that principle that digs into it. So, and this is just, to describe what I just said there. So ends, means, and methods. We can think of both means and methods as parameters within which you optimize your ends. And I talked about number 2. So, and this is the slide that I'm going to end on for here. It's just a distilled overview of what is in principle 2. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many of you have read PAS 828 and how many principle 2. David, I don't know if we can start with some kind of question on that, but just to say, you can see here that the title is the purpose achieved in the right way, means and methods. And in ISO 37000 on governance, the term is that the governing body is essentially governing the direction, in other words, what it is trying to achieve, in the way intended. And in the way intended is those means and methods, it is those parameters for it, and that it is the strategic and accountability anchor. I would also say the oversight anchor. Like I say, PAS 828, it's a starting point. We'll talk about what's happening in a global sense later on. So we have 7 behaviors. The first one, articulate, elaborate, and act in ways that consistently commit to the purpose. So this is written. These are all written primarily for governing body, who are the ultimate structuring of the governance system. And this is really about justifying the purpose, elaborating the purpose to the level useful for strategy, but not more, that you constrain strategy, and to embody that purpose as a collective of decision makers as the governing body. Secondly, to align strategy and policy to achieving the purpose. So basically aligning all directional aspects in terms of strategic objectives, in terms of policy, which embodies both the direction, but usually also the parameters, making sure that they are all totally aligned, that there's, mapped totally. Thirdly, aligning interests and decision-making to the purpose. So that's all of your internal accountability, so all your roles, job descriptions, et cetera, your oversight, your risk, your risk policy. So, and anyone who knows ISO 37000 will see the direct connection here with those principles that are of governance that are in ISO 37000, but also aligning powerful stakeholders, because obviously you are only as good as the stakeholders and able to move forward as well as your powerful stakeholders can. My phone's ringing, but I'm going to ignore that. I'm in a hotel room. Fourthly, to align the culture to achieve the purpose, and that's both in terms of hardware. I'm going to walk and put it down at the same time. That's in terms of hardware and software, which means, in other words, your systems, processes, etc., everything that is tangible, but also everything that's intangible in terms of your assumptions, heroes, ways of showing up, etc., etc. And then aligning rewards and incentives to achieve the purpose, both senior leaders specifically as a clause on that, but also all employees. Then there's a behavior called financing the purpose, which I think in retrospect we should call aligning financing with the purpose. And this is really critical. This is about who you give away power to in exchange for financial input, form and duration of investment, calculating true profit. That includes all costs at the bottom of the triangle that you don't happen to have to do that, but it's necessary. Profitability of projects and cross-subsidizing and recognizing when and how that's important, and also levels and distribution of residual financial capital and what that means and what finance means in terms of success or not in relation to the purpose. And then finally, assessing, measuring and reporting against the purpose. So obviously, this is a sub-aspect of accountability, the external aspect of accountability, measuring what matters, and which will result in actual change. There's no point measuring something if you're not going to make a decision against it. Using existing measures where possible, don't reinvent the wheel, try and work as a global collective. Disclosing to stakeholders and making sure you are considering voiceless stakeholders. Monitoring, measuring profits and what they mean properly. And that's that. So over to you, David.
Crikey. So while I'm just sharing the screen, can I invite everybody just in the chat, if you've read PAS 808, just type the word read. It'd be interesting to see from our audience how many are familiar with what Victoria's given us. So we'll just see. We'll play back that when we get a moment.
Yeah, David, I think that's an important question. And I also want to make the point that, here, the Good Governance Academy and myself, and so some of our attendees, network members, are located in other parts of the world. I'm in South Africa, in Pretoria. But these standards like these, the PAS 808 that's currently being developed in the UK, sets the tone. And we're following suit, and it anyways aligns with what we have currently in our other codes and practices as well. If I'm thinking the King Code in South Africa as well, good to others. So absolutely those, some might not have read it, but it's so important. It filters through globally, and it's the hot topic at the moment.
And Victoria was mentioning before we came on that I think you said in August, Victoria, the PAS 808, the UK basis that you guys have authored, it's likely that that's going to get taken on in a global context, and you'll be looking for input and thoughts to support that. You're on mute, Victoria.
Sorry. Yes, I've just dealt with that phone call. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that I can't emphasize enough. you know, PAS 828 and the fact that it's in the UK, I mean, all of us that were involved in that are very, firstly, internationally embedded, but secondly, it draws from ISO 37000, which is an international standard signed off by 164 countries. And when we developed PAS 828, it was essentially a small group trying to act on behalf of the world to say, what's a good starting point here? To go from a blank sheet to something coherent that isn't just a set of behaviors, but that it has substance and structure and meaning behind it. And that it can answer the question, how do you truly align an organizational decision-making system via its governance with a sustainable future? That's the essay question, but it's just a start. And so the very exciting thing is that that has gone out for global vote. So the UK has put forward the proposal to ISO, and ISO is merely a collective of 170 nations that have standards bodies around the world to say, we think that we need a global view on this. We think that we're at a point that we could get consensus, because this is everywhere in the world. We might be calling it different things, but essentially we are trying to resolve that question in the center that I just said. And so if we don't resolve that, we are never going to achieve it. The status quo will always win. And so on the 12th of August, we'll know if that's been successful. And then kicking off in September in the UK, and then the next working group or the next project meeting in November in Shenzhen, we'll start a 2-year process, we hope, for the world to come together to co-create this. And so when we look at PAS 828, that will essentially go alongside across those 2 years as a place where we can engage practically. Let's not lose time. Let's work with PAS 828. Let's see what works, what doesn't work. And then we're in a better position to bring our views in to make that ISO in purpose-driven organizations exactly what it needs to be. So this is my very practical call to all of you to say, this is our opportunity, a catalyst moment for the world. It's just up to us to take it.
So there's already lots in it, and I guess it's going to get richer and more relevant to more people, I guess. But I guess what we're going to do today is hopefully discuss elements of it. So Victoria presented just trying to get my screen to work, the 7 principles. There's lots in here we can unpack. We haven't got lots and lots of time, but we can focus on some areas and discuss and try and engage people in their views on it. The areas that we're going to delve into, there's a point 2 there, and I guess throughout, there's the implication is that our organizations, based on our purpose-driven principles and our worldviews, will need to formulate strategy. So if we're not effective at formulating strategy right now, then we're not going to be able to formulate strategy any better once we've got a greater stimulus to do that. Furthermore, if we can't achieve line of sight from that strategy through the business and maintain a connection between the implications of our purpose and what we're actually doing, if we can't maintain that connection, then we can't do that today. Then it's not going to be any easier when we're trying to include the sort of non-financial or additional purpose-driven drivers in the future.
David, sorry to interject, but people are asking if you could share full screen. We can see the presenter view at the moment for some reason.
Oh, I see. Interesting. I thought I had. Bear with me. That's surreal. I thought I'd click that button. Just twiddle your thumbs while I find my mouse. That way, right. Sorry. Stop sharing. Let's try again.
While you're doing that, I might just say very quickly, in terms of ISO, the key practical things you can do is get in touch with your national member body. It'll be your standardization body for the country that you're in. And you can join and encourage them to become a participating member of the ISO. So that can happen now as part of the vote, or it can happen later. Then you'll end up with a mirror committee that will basically mirror that work. And you can join that committee as an individual. If you're an international organization that fits certain criteria, you can become a liaison. So I just mentioned that because those are very practical steps.
So screen okay now? Sorry about that. So implication, formulate strategy. If we can't formulate strategy, then now we're not going to be able to do this any better. Once we've had a great deep dive into it, if you can't achieve line of sight from our purpose as written through the business and maintain that connection, we're not going to be. It's not going to be any easier when we're adopting purpose-driven behaviours. Prioritization, I guess alignment of assignment of funding, leadership time, resources, setting up reward systems. If we can't prioritize effectively today, then we're not going to be able to prioritize effectively tomorrow. And the assess, measure, and report. If we don't have a connection from the do through back to the purpose to enable us to course correct and re-steer today, and that's not as good as it could be, then we're not going to be able to do it any better tomorrow. So, Lindy, Victoria, David, do you have any comments on that on those points? Is that a good set to pick out and delve into? What do you think of those four we've selected?
I think, yes, from my side, resources are always limited. So it's very important to prioritize. Also, that links to our conversation before the session, convincing organizations and the community, corporate community, to engage in purpose-driven organizations. It needs to make sense to them. And prioritization of resources is a good practical start, I think.
I don't know if David wants to go first.
Well, we're going to go into the more detailed pieces, so we'll take your views even more in a minute.
So then maybe, David, I'll just very briefly say that I think that this is that you're sort of picking out parts of here, and they're all important. These are really, really important. I would say that this is a journey. But the more that we can dig into, I think, ISO 37000 and the language in ISO 37000, because the reality is that if you are, governance is direction, oversight of that direction, and accountability for that direction in just the simplest of terms. Direction is, what are you trying to achieve within what parameters? Strategy is, how do I achieve that optimizing goal within those parameters? And if we can keep reminding ourselves of that simple fundamental reality, everything else becomes much easier. The word strategy, as we know, is just used in so many complex terms. But if you're just saying, how do we achieve an optimizing goal that we all are clear on within parameters, suddenly it's like, oh, well, yeah, obviously that needs to be dynamic, et cetera, but it can't work. And that's the problem we have with current organizations. They are not clear in the large part. What are you trying to achieve within what parameters? Values sit there on the wall. They're not encoded in decision-making parameters. So I think if we get a lot of that right, the rest of this will sort of fall out, rather than saying, how do we formulate strategy and sort of, I'm not saying you're saying that, David, but abstract from that. And then oversight, you are overseeing that, not something else. And your prioritization will come from implementing your strategy. And your strategy is by default your sense of what you think is the best way to achieve your goal within your parameters. And I know the reality is always more complex, but we also complexify what could be simpler, I think.
Okay. So my internet dipped out for a second then, so I didn't hear what you said, Victoria, but I think other people did. So I'll just step on then. So let's dig into the first piece of this, and the first piece of that is formulate strategy. So we're going to run a poll. So we're going to ask people what they think. David Booth and I did a session a few months ago where we talked to organizations about how effective is their strategy delivery ecosystem. How well are they? What's preventing them from delivering strategy? And David did a couple of points in here that we could pluck out.
Yes, I think there's a couple of points that are very relevant to what Victoria said in terms of and went through in terms of those PAS 208 principle behaviors, basically. So the one on there that is perhaps most apparent in organizations, we don't have a clue what the corporate strategy is. Just go on, do whatever. In here it says the sponsor. It could be whatever my department head says, my functional head, etc. One of the most critical things in achieving transformational approaches to organizations is the understanding, the engagement and the understanding of everybody in the organization about what its purpose, what it's trying to achieve. And I was thinking about this as Victoria's going through the behaviors. And I'd say there are arguably sort of 4 challenges in organizations in how to adopt a purpose-driven and a wider purpose-driven approach to their how they go forward, if you like, whether you call it strategy or purpose or whatever. So the 4 challenges I would say are getting the acceptance of purpose as being a key driver, and particularly in the light of the PAS 808 wider perspective, getting acceptance throughout the organization of a different worldview, of that different view of an organization as part of a wider whole, system whole. And that can be challenging because people are coming from very different perspectives, particularly with the profit motive and the importance of that, or with stakeholders. So driving that and using those principles seems to be quite key to get that wider acceptance of it. The second point is, and that refers to that on the slide, is getting the understanding and embedding of that throughout the organization, so that everybody understands that strategy, how it fits in, that purpose. Terms don't necessarily matter a lot as long as whatever you're achieving is lived. You can debate between sort of strategy, purpose, etc. But purpose is the driver, and strategy is the way in which you sort of achieve it. The culture and credibility is important as well, and this is where governance becomes very important. Is what happens when you've got a challenge? What happens when you've got a compromise? How do you resolve that to achieve the purpose? And also, what reinforcement and sustaining feedback have you got to get that circle to say, yes, we are living this, we are achieving this purpose, this is how the organization is living. So in terms of delivering a purpose-driven organization and the strategy to move the organization forward, those are 4 challenges in that journey that I would see from those behaviors that are outlined. I don't know whether that resonates or that helps or not, but it's just struck me as being quite important as those 4 challenges.
What do people think? So we were getting some comments from folks right now. We can build up some more points. So what are the challenges to deliver we already know about? No coherent, relatable data to underpin strategic performance. Yeah, I guess so. That's back to the measurement aspect of principle 2, I guess, Victoria. Lack of transparency and trust, that sounds like a cultural issue. No clear purpose, that talks to our session pretty much. But has anybody else got any thoughts to chip in? If we can't formulate strategy and we can't deliver it, then whatever purpose we have, it's going to be for nothing. Any final thoughts before I move on to the next bit?
Question from my side. Set is your purpose then. Do you have a deliberate or a emergent strategy? Can you change? How do you keep it real and keep it alive for an entire period, be it a 5-year or a 1-year reporting period, etc.? In terms of your strategy, your purpose inside your strategy.
This is one thing, Lindy, that I think we really need to grasp at all levels of the system, up to the governmental level, which is all nested. It's all nested. Is that the better and stronger the governance is, this is what I think we really don't grasp, the better and stronger the clarity about what you are trying to achieve, your reason to exist, your purpose, within what parameters. And then 2 different things, and they work together, and you need both of them in terms of clarity. If you have that, then yes, as a governing body, and that's in ISO 37000, you would want to turn that You'd want to elaborate that both in the purpose statement, in your vision, your mission, and your strategic objectives, which is essentially what you're then, in normative terms, it doesn't have to be like this, but normally holding executive to account for. The strategy is then, in terms of the executive, how do I achieve those strategic objectives? Now, if those strategic objectives are too narrow, too detailed, too focused, they're going to constrain the executive strategy. So let's assume that they are all scoped out, and that's in PAS 808, at the right level of scoping that allows enough clarity and for accountability and oversight to happen, but not so much that you're constraining. Then you can literally have the most emergent strategy. You can get rid of all the rules because you have clarity about what you're governing and you have a system by which to have oversight and accountability for it. What we're doing at all levels of the system, including government, is because we're not clear, none of us are clear, not even those who have the highest levels of power in the main, about the goal and the parameters. It means that what we do, and especially because we're operating in the middle of the triangle, business as usual, focused on financial self-interest, we have all of these negative consequences, and we're plugging the hole with bureaucracy and more rules. So it's not just we're creating rules because we're unclear, we're creating rules because we're getting really toxic consequences from operating in the middle of the triangle. And then what we're doing in order to like just take ESG, we're adding more and more specificity. And some of that is not, it's parameters. A lot of ESG is proper important parameters, but some of it's like betting on horses, right? And we should be clearing that out. So that would be my view, is that we need strategy. By the time we finish this conversation, we're in such a chaotic, breakdown of our systems will cause more and more chaos. If we're not as agile as possible, we're stuffed. That means better and better governance. So for me, governance literacy and focusing on that is core.
Absolutely. So that's topic number one. I think some of what you're talking about there, Victoria, comes out in the next page. So the next thing to chat about is how if we have a purpose, can we see that it is cascaded through our organization? Given what you said about expressing it in a way that you allow people to be locally flexible and creative, but how can we trace the influence of the purpose implications through our organization? If we can't trace the implications of our purpose through the organization, then perhaps our organization isn't delivering on purpose. So what I'm trying to get at here is that it's possibly very simple and straightforward to cascade purpose into a beautified vision, an elaborate strategic paper, and some clear objectives I can give to my heads of to work against. But at every single level that we go further down, we try and take the implications of that purpose through our organization. We're slowly but surely starting to lose a little bit of meaning. And what if we're to be purpose driven? Are we clear now how we can get our purpose to penetrate the organization without suffering too much meaning loss as to what we're intending, without parochialism and irrelevance creeping in, or people claiming realism has to contradict what the purpose implication is? Is this, to me, is one of the biggest? This looks like the biggest challenge of helping an organization to be properly purpose driven. I'm going to flip over so people can catch their thoughts. But what do you guys think? How far down in organizations have we got line of sight of our purpose now? And is that good enough for when we want to step up how we handle purpose in the future? Was that too big a question?
Do you want any comments,
David? Sorry, go, David.
I was going to say it'd be interesting to see what people think. There were some really interesting comments on the previous Slido, but critically with purpose, the answer to the question is it has to be embedded right way through the organization. It's a driving force. It has to be unifying. It has to bring people together within it. It's got to be almost ingrained. And I think people have commented about the cascade and the separation between communication from top down or various aspects of the organization. No, absolutely fundamental within the purpose-driven organization is the embedding and the understanding of that throughout the organization, however simply expressed. That has got to be the fundamental on it. So interesting to see what people say, and it's a challenge to achieve that. It's a cultural challenge within organizations as well. You've got to live it as well as just articulating it in words.
The thing that I think is going to be the biggest challenge is we want people to interpret and localize, but we don't want to lose connection. So that's a tough call for me. How do we give people enough freedom to be creative and to respond appropriately without becoming disconnected with what we're aspiring for? And how do we enable people to be creative and fund them amongst the things that we really want to do, whatever they are?
David, that's really, I think, the point I was making before. The more you have governance, the more you can have non-rules based approach. And if you look, for example, at all of the research into purpose-driven organizations back in the day, look at like Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organizations and Teal organizations, and all of the assumptions that purpose enables less rules-based organizations, because the assumption is that hierarchy comes with the old way of doing it. Now, I don't see any evidence to say that is, you have to be non-rules based to be purpose-driven. Certainly in the transition phase, having more structure and rules, you could move faster because you're moving between one paradigm and the other. But certainly there's a lot to say the purpose, because of its strategic clarity, enables you to be less rules-based. But so people have intuitively come to that conclusion. So I think for me, that would answer your question. That is exactly because you have clarity of purpose that you can unleash more creativity and emergent strategy.
Absolutely, because by creating more red tape, more rules, more controls, you're just creating a bigger burden to change. So you really need to update your existing system of control and your existing processes with a purpose, and not add more red tape and more cost.
In many ways, a very simple, understood articulation of purpose and strategy for how to deliver it provides a platform. It provides the principles, it provides the guidelines through which people in the organization operate. You refer back to that as being a key, as being why you're here and what you're doing, and to help make decisions for trade-offs. And that's where good governance comes in as well, to reinforce the process for those decisions that make sure that there is reinforcement for the decisions that refer back to purpose and driven, and that's the parameters. It helps people to understand that. So
I would go further even, David, if I may, to say, because I agree exactly with what you're saying, but I would say it's not to help guide. I think what we need is for those to be hard, as in, this is our purpose, this is our reason to exist. And ultimately, and in PAS 828, it then also gives ability at all levels of the system to reflect on if that purpose is the optimal strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all. So it needs to be constantly held and revisited, but it's nonetheless a hard goal that everyone is certain and can rely on. Equally so, the parameters are not just suggestions of what to do. They are hard parameters. If you say we treat people well, what does that mean? Is something on the wall? What does it mean? Well, if it's not encoded in a parameter for decision making, so treating people well means no matter what decision you're making, you do not pay them less than the minimum wage. You do not bully them into doing what they do, whatever it is. Yeah. But also, let's just take the really clear example of climate change. People talk about climate change, they talk about climate change targets. Really, those are targets to getting the business model to act within a hard parameter. But that governing body needs to be really, really clear, as do the senior executives, that is going to be, once we get there, net zero is the new parameter beyond which there is not a negotiable. You might be able to negotiate by cross-subsidizing across different parts of your business and potentially residual offsets, but nonetheless, so that's all I would say, David, is I just think we need to move from something you do and something that's guidance to no, these are, and that's how you get the creativity to be unleashed, because there's certainty in that.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, the clear articulation of that provides the platform for the guidance. I wasn't arguing against a clear articulation. That's absolutely critical, because how can people understand what it is and how can they refer to it? I think the point I was trying to make was that having got that clear articulation, having got that definition, having got that translated through the organization, that then provides, if you like, the reference point for people to be creative, to be innovative, etc. They're referring back to that continually. And just going back to strategy, strategy is dynamic. Organizations are dynamic. The critical thing on this is the conversations with depth that are happening at every level of the organization, that are looping back to that reference point, that are shaping how the organization adapts, that agility that you refer to, that's absolutely critical. So it's a really dynamic process, but critical in that, absolutely critical, is the conversations within the organization and the framework and the enabling of that help an organization to develop and its stage on its next part of its strategy journey towards achieving its purpose. So that, I think, is a dynamic that is really, really powerful and hard to achieve, and needs the reinforcement and needs the commitment and needs the belief of the people that are leading that organization to say, this is how we're going to operate it, which is where, you know, PAS 208 is a great way of stimulating and creating and starting that process in organizations to get them thinking, to get them talking, to get them implementing it.
Absolutely. No, I totally.
Guys, sorry, Victoria. Sorry, a quick point. We need to move on. That's all.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say, this is why also it's important to remember that you probably potentially need an elongated period of holding a purpose lightly, because unless a purpose really can and does and makes sense, both in its articulation at the top line, and it's not just a strap line, that's a communications decision. It is a whole elaborate, very clear justification of that purpose. Unless that can invoke those conversations and result in daily decision-making against it, then it might not be the right purpose. And I think holding it loosely for a period of time is really useful.
So having a purpose and a strategy, absolutely vital. There might be all kinds of implications within that we'd like to do, but what can we do? So we need to prioritize. So whichever business objectives that are implied from our strategy, we'll need to make practical choices about how which are the most important things. It's unlikely we're ever going to be able to do everything in an organization. All the implications of our purpose just won't be feasible. So what is it that we can do? So we might be able to clearly express them, and we absolutely do need to clearly express them, but we then need to make choices. And we'll need a reasonably systematic way of being able to make choices, because where we might be able to communicate our high level objectives and what their relative priorities are from highest level to next level of executive responsibility, when we further start cascading down the implications of doing, we're going to have to give people guidance around how they actually deploy resources and funds, and that then needs some information and data to do that with. We can't drive it emotion based, otherwise our organizations turn into a screaming argument. And that's my view, is what I've seen anyway. So we were going to have a poll on how priorities are defined and cascaded, and are you systematic about those? Because if you're not systematic about being able to prioritize, then it's going to be very, very much argument based and not information based. But based on time, I'm just going to skip this one and stir that in to the next one, because the next one talks about, okay, so if we have managed to prioritize, we have to deploy leadership time, funds, and resources. We practically have to achieve this. And we might be able to, at the highest levels, be able to share funding and leadership time and resources as requested. But as time goes by, where actually do we end up applying those? So our intent might be to fund and provide capability one way, but does it actually turn out that way? Do people prioritize in line with the purpose that we set them, or do they have their own parochial needs? Do they talk about having to cope with reality, or where does reality kick in? How do we can our organizations see the difference between what our intended prioritization is and what our actual prioritization is? And what are your thoughts on the need to be systematic about how we prioritize through our organizations? And that was the next question. Do we have, are our ecosystems currently good enough to prioritize based on our purpose, and can we control how we deploy based on prioritization, or is that even relevant? Do we just hope our ecosystems decide the right things to do and spend the money the right way, or do we have to build that into our governance frameworks a bit more too?
I mean, maybe David, just from my perspective, I mean, you're really talking about the business case to do something, right? So whatever you want to do, you need to create a business case for it. That business case is essentially therefore a strategy. You are saying, this is the way I want to deploy those resources in order to achieve, you know, part of that nested system. And so essentially that is where the rubber hits the road in terms of, this is the best way that we can use our resources, financial and otherwise, in order to achieve that optimizing objective within those parameters. And that should ultimately, within that conversation, should be the ultimate objective and the ultimate parameters, as well as the cascading, so that you have the chance for people to question the strategy that's being cascaded down to them. Because if that's actually the strategy, you've got some people in that system who are interpreting strategy and therefore the realms of the business case in a way that actually means that decision is going to end up discordant with achieving the purpose within the parameter. There's an issue there. So really, to me, it's one and the same thing. And if you imagine, if you're trying to achieve something that actually does good in the world, it contributes to long-term well-being for all, and you have all the parameters, not just of financial capital margins needed to satisfy stakeholders, pay bills and invest, but you also have those other hard parameters around all the social and environmental system health, non-financial capitals and stakeholders. That's a lot of limitations there, and we need them because we've been routinely operating outside and we've been asset stripping our systems and we're collapsing, right? So that is massively, so I would say it's going to be it is the biggest creative task we have, to create business cases for investment, for deploying those resources that will achieve that goal within the parameter. When I hear you talk about prioritization, I'm hearing, well, what if we can achieve the goal and we can get within one or two of these parameters, but not all of them? And if we get within this, we can't do that. And that then requires understanding, including what's the climate health system? How urgent is climate change versus biodiversity loss or water scarcity? It really requires that level.
This is dynamic, isn't it? So we can model, and whichever document it is we do this analysis within, we can model what our intent is and what our direction is for deployment, our priorities. But then the rubber hits the road. How do we see that resources have been deployed in line with what our expectation is? How do we exert control? How do we see that our expectations are being met? How do we see progress on? Are we seeing measures show that we're achieving? So to me, this prioritization, it's more than just writing the business case. It's about dynamic strategy and management, ongoing management of making sure we're deploying the right amounts in the right areas. I think it's going to make purpose-driven organizations succeed or fail. That's my view. That we can prioritize and achieve it. What do you guys think?
That's what I think in terms of the importance of the point I mentioned about the feedback, sustaining feedback, and the feedback loops and the reinforcement mechanism you have in an organization, the information flow and the reference, both ways. Information flow is circular in terms of this reinforces what's being achieved. There's a transparency, there is a fluidity of the information that refers back to and aligns to the purpose, so you can adjust if need be. So the importance of that information and that transparency of it and the visibility of it is key to helping adjust if something is coming, prioritizing with a bit of conflict, etc. How do you resolve that? You need the information flow back. You need the reinforcement to be able to dynamically then adjust that and make sure you're back on track with the right priorities. So
strategy
that's
is not
key in
just
terms
about
of building that
sorry.
within your frameworks, I think.
Sorry, David. But strategy is not just about projects, is it? Strategy isn't just about change, it's about business performance and product creation as well. So there's some remarks here about structured projects and that be the way that strategy is delivered. That's part of it, isn't it? But another comment in here was governance strategy should cover all departments. Well, it's yeah. So I think that's an important thing to pluck out. A lot of talk about a strategic program, and they've deployed their resources and change programs, but it's not just about change programs that's going to help us be successful.
No, there's strategy. Sorry, Victoria.
No, you go.
Crikey, this feels like a good one.
It's not about change projects.
More just that we're kind of running out of time. I think we better just move on. Anyone got any last thoughts before I just press the button?
I just did want to very briefly say that
probably inevitably on this one. Okay, so here's a proposition. Here's a challenge for you guys. If you want purpose driven, I think the challenge here, I think Victoria and David have both mentioned it. We need to look at how you drive today. So if we can't drive purpose through organization, we can't communicate, we can't maintain and sustain it, then we're going to struggle. So within our big business integrate governance framework, we've got some practical things that we suggest people attend to and actually build and operate to enable this ecosystem to function effectively. It's all very good to have the principles and the information, but how do we make it work? How do we help organizations move on to create something that operates? And just to offer you 3 principles, there's lots more stuff in here that we could tease out. But the first principle that you can have a look at and dig in some more is strategy information model. So I wonder how many organizations have a clear definition of the connection of the relevant information sets and documents through organization. Can we trace how information connects? Most organizations I've speak to have lots of documents but don't necessarily connect them all up and configuration manage them together. So the concept of the strategy information model is that we try and pull that together and connect it and operate that as a tool. The second component, and there we go. Second component is a strategy operating model. So we create the environment within which we can manage, develop our purpose, develop our strategic response, and make that something that the business supports, enables to happen. So rather than it being like a wish and a directive, we actually fund it and make it work. And the third component is the operating model for governance within the business. So we talked about the top level strategic process. We talked about the operating model to connect strategy to the business, but then we've got how do we execute the prioritization and deliver against all that good stuff. These are some principles that we think are practical means to, well, I think are practical means to help an organization achieve. There's more about it, so we could talk further. We're just kind of running out of time, but for us, if we can get our strategy operating model to grasp our purpose and help us connect purpose to strategy and turn that into what the business wants to achieve, then we can connect and balance our business as usual activity, the change activity, and our value generation and product creation. We can balance that and connect it all together with integrated governance. So for me, the whole PAS 808, the principles in ISO 37000, for me, the next step is to, well, what practically do we have to make, build, and operate to enable all this stuff to happen? And that's what we've been talking about here. And one last little summary, the big framework, there's a knowledge base you can connect to there. We talk about all these pieces, and it's a free information set you can use and compare what you have to some of the stuff that's in here and use it as you see fit. Not at all offering to contradict what's in PAS 808 or in ISO 37000. Absolutely far from it. We're trying to be pragmatic and give people some tools to and some things they can build as opposed to the principles that would guide them. Whew, blimey, Bill. We've I think we're nearly there.
David.
So maybe there'll be some conclusions and thoughts and chip in, folks, as you see fit. So to my mind, I think people recognised in the last session, so perhaps this one, that PAS 808 and ISO 37000 and all its variants are absolutely vital to enable us to drive purpose-driven. We recognise, I think, that implementing principles of purpose-driven organisations requires some change, some fixing or betterment. Cascading and connecting purpose and purposes isn't easy. It's not going to happen on its own. And my proposition to you is that things like the big model gives you like a something to play with, to talk about what you need to physically build and operate to get this to happen. Final thoughts.
Wonderful.
Anyway.
Thank you,
Lindy,
David.
back to you.
Okay, excellent. And thank you for suggesting practical approaches. I think we're all aware of the importance of purpose-driven organizations and defining your purpose, but how do we get there? And Victoria, you made that point many times. I'm going to hand over to David Booth and Victoria for some final remarks, and then we'll end off our session. Thanks.
Nothing much from me other than to say it was great to be with you all. Do grasp the moment to create the ISO and purpose-driven organization. It's core. The rest is, to me, nice ideas. This is where it really gets serious. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, David Booth.
Yes, no, thank you very much indeed. It's been a fascinating discussion, and the key thing is that core heart of an organization that is embedded, with the purpose being at the core heart of the organization. It's embedded, and how do you achieve that? It needs sustainability. And I think what's come up in the discussion for me is right through the organization, all those mechanisms that you need to reinforce it, all those behaviors that you've got in that you listed, Victoria, so important to really carry that forward and embed. And the key thing is starting that conversation, and then having the courage and the determination to sustain it and to really embed it in an organization to live it. But thank you very much. Great conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Yes, those conversations are so important. Just one brief final thank you to everyone. Thank you to Carolyn Chalmers and the Good Governance Academy for hosting us, to our panelists and our network. And then one request. Please, panelists, network, attendees, anyone, please send us your requests. You can find our details on our website. And I've also shared the links to the websites and LinkedIn profiles of our panelists. Send us issues you would like to further discuss, burning issues, your main challenges, that we have these wonderful experts, we have access to them, and please send us a message if you have specific issues that you want to discuss. We've started this webinar series. We're building up towards measurement and reporting. But up to that, I think it's so new. And like everyone has said, the discussion, the conversations are so important. So send us a message on what are those burning issues that you want to discuss further. I think that's all from us today then. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Right.